Good morning to a new lecture. Today we'll be discussing several topics. Among them, the first will be the human teeth. So, in an adult human, the jaw contains 32 fully developed teeth. They contain four types of teeth: incisors, canines, molars, and premolars. The functions of the incisors is primarily just to bite and cutting of food. It helps to bite and cut primarily vegetables. Now, canines are only present in carnivorous animals which eat meat, as canines help to basically break through the meat more easily due to their pointy nature. The molars and premolars are involved in the crushing and in the grinding of the food. Now, we have to remember that there are two types of teeth: deciduous teeth, which are also known as milky teeth, and secondly, permanent teeth. During the first few years of life, about zero to from about 0 to 3 to 4 years, the deciduous teeth begin to form. Afterwards, until 12 years of age, the deciduous teeth uh, break, and about 13 to 14 years of age, the jaw contains fully permanent teeth. Now, an important fact to know is that all of the other three types of teeth have both deciduous teeth and permanent teeth. However, molars do not exist in the form of deciduous teeth. They only exist in the form of permanent teeth. So they are not temporary. Now, as I've already discussed the function of all the incisors, canines, premolars, and molars, I will be discussing with you the importance of our everyday tooth care. So, in order for us to have to keep our teeth, why is it so much important for us to keep our teeth clean? We need to keep our teeth clean to prevent dental caries from forming on our teeth. So, what happens is that over time, as time passes, gaps begin to develop between our teeth, and between these gaps, food gets accumulated, especially at night time. Now, why is it especially recommended to floss or brush our teeth at night time and at breakfast? This is because at night time, when food accumulates between the gaps in between our teeth, bacteria start to act on them. And when bacteria act on the food, they basically use the glucose or the sugar to metabolize energy from it. And during the process, they release or excrete acids. And what this acid does is that it dissolves the outermost non-living layer. Not you. The important thing is that you have to remember the outermost layer of the teeth is non-living. They initially dissolve the outer non-living layer of the teeth, which is known as the enamel of the tooth. The enamel is the outermost layer of the tooth. Over time, after weeks and months, the cavity starts to form, and slowly, the cavity basically penetrates inner and inner, and more acids are excreted from the bacteria. So the outermost layer is the enamel. The second innermost layer is the dentine, and the most innermost layer is the pulp. Now, the pulp is the region where all the blood vessels and nerves lie. So, when the bacteria reach the pulp, when the cavity reaches the pulp, it is when a person feels pain. So, this is when a person feels pain. As I told you that the pulp, before the pulp, when the cavity is in the enamel and the dentine, a person does not feel pain. Now we need to know that further the tooth is divided into two parts, the crown and the root. The crown is the outermost layer, whereas the root is the inner layer of the person. Here is the pulp, as I've already told you that the three parts of the which comprise the basic anatomy of the tooth. Now I will tell you how eventually what happens to the cavity. So if basically what happens is that after the acids are excreted and when the tooth starts to decay, it leads to an abscess formation. What happens with brushing is that usually the bacteria can be easily removed or from the outer surface of the tooth. However, if the cavity remains there and there isn't enough flossing or brushing, basically the cavity starts to harden and there is plaque formation. Now, you need to understand that plaque is extremely hard. It is the yellowish layer on the top of the teeth, and it cannot be removed by simply brushing or flossing because plaque not only contains bacteria, but it contains a mixture of food, saliva, cheek cells, and bacteria which collect. So only dentists can remove it, remove it, and normal brushing or flossing cannot remove it. So if usually you've seen that the person gets the bad bacteria taken out and they have a filling. However, if the basically the bacteria have invaded the pulp and the tooth cannot be saved, then a root canal is performed later. So this pretty much covers the entire anatomy of the tooth. A side note is that what are wisdom teeth? Wisdom teeth are basically teeth which are usually erupt in people from around 18 to 25 years of age. If they are not grown, they may impact the other tooth, and they are usually responsible for causing the pain usually observed in teenagers, as they don't have a significant function in digestion. Which it is all often wise to basically just remove the wisdom teeth by a surgical operation. Now, there are some remedies on how we can care for our teeth. Firstly, we need to know that our toothpaste should contain fluoride, since fluoride helps to strengthen the tooth enamel, and the toothpaste should be obviously bactericidal. Now, what is the purpose to use an alkaline toothpaste? Since we already discussed that bacteria release acids during their cavity formation, so using an alkaline toothpaste neutralizes the acidity and prevents the invasion of the cavity further. Similarly, we should avoid eating sweet or starchy materials before going to bed, as I discussed before you in slightly above that bacteria basically feed on the food or the mesh like bolus which is entrapped between the teeth, and basically they use the glucose. So the more sweet or starchy a material is, the more glucose is it contains, and the more the chances of the cavity forming. So lastly, after like I told you above that the only method to remove the tartar is to visit the dentist, and this what is this procedure called? This procedure is called scaling. Now, in the second part of this video, we will be discussing homeostasis and the central nervous system of the body. So, homeostasis is the process in which the total internal body conditions are kept constant. Now, we have to understand that homeostasis is an extremely important process, as many of our several of the body parameters have to be kept in a constant level. For example, the body temperature, the body, as I have discussed many times in my previous videos as well. If the body temperature rises above 107 Fahrenheit, the enzymes get denatured. So the body's paramount role is to keep the body temperature fixed at 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Similarly, the body pH has to be basically kept constant at 7.43 so that the body does not go into acidosis or alkalosis. Similarly, the other thing is that the skin of the body. Now, how does the process of homeostasis occur? Now, we have to understand that the skin is the largest organ of the human body. This is not only a statement, but you also have to remember this, that if anyone it's basically tested at what is the largest human organ, it's the skin. People often are basically confused that the organs are only internal, such as the liver, stomach, or intestine, but the skin is actually the largest organ of the human body. Now, apart from just protection or insulation, you need to understand that the skin is an extremely important sense organ. It basically detects even the minute changes in the environmental temperature, whether it be a cold or whether it be similarly even a 1 degree rise or fall in temperature. So how is this process maintained? Basically, whenever the temperature of the skin rises, of the blood basically rises above 37 degrees, there is more and there vasodilation. And so the arteries vasodilate and more blood is brought towards the skin. Now, when more blood is brought towards the skin, the basically the sweat glands release more sweat, and so when the sweat evaporates, as we would have studied in physics, that the process of cooling occurs in when evaporation occurs, whether it be of sweat or anything else, because the molecules which have more kinetic energy are lost, leaving behind the molecules which have lesser kinetic energy. Therefore, the body basically cools down. Apart from this, uh, how now, what is the reverse phenomenon when temperature decreases below 37 degrees? Obviously, the exact opposite occurs. Sweating is reduced and the arterioles vasoconstrict. So when the vasoconstrict, there is lesser blood flow towards the skin, and thus there is basically lesser heat loss. So apart from this, there are several adaptations. For example, if I give an example of whales, they have blubber in them, which have the in which the fat helps to keep them insulated. In cases of human, the fat in the dermis helps basically to insulate the human body. Apart from that, there are several physiological responses as well. For example, the involuntary process of shivering. Now, what does shivering do? Shivering basically creates movement, and movement creates more and more kinetic energy due to the vibration of molecules. Therefore, the heat energy is basically generated, and when heat as energy is generated, the body helps to basically maintain about temperature of 37 degrees even during cold times. So apart from this, humans usually adapt to basically like drinking of coffee and even wearing of warm clothes. So this is also an external modifiable adaptation, which they basically do in order to keep warm. So what are the receptors which detect the change in temperature in the skin? So we need to know that enable to be able to detect the change in temperature in the external environment. Whenever there is a significant change in temperature in the blood, the change in temperature is basically detected by the hypothalamus. Now, hypothalamus is the primary sensory organ in the brain, and it is responsible for all the coordination which goes on. So the two types of basically processes of temperature by the skin I just discussed above, these come under the basically the heading of negative feedback. So what is negative feedback? Negative feedback is a regulatory process in which it tries to reverse the effect caused by a stimulus. For example, there has been a rise in blood temperature, so it is detected by the sensory organ, the hypothalamus, and in response to it, there is increased sweating, heat loss, so that body temperature returns to 37 degrees. So what was the thing? There was a rise in the temperature. So the body acted or to reverse in order to reverse the change in temperature. This is known as negative feedback. Similarly, in cases of, for example, if there was a cold environment, there was a drop in the blood temperature. So what happened? There was a drop, so the body had to reverse that thing. So the body basically acted in to oppose the change, and it rose the body temperature to 37 degrees. Now we'll be discussing about the brain and its components and the central and peripheral nervous system. So these are the parts of the brain. This is the cerebrum. The cerebrum is involved in the memory and the intelligence, and all the emotions. All these are parts of the cerebrum. As you would have known that there are two parts, the right and left parts of the cerebrum. One is basically involved with emotions and intelligence, and other with the artistic. And similarly, these are the other parts, the medulla oblongata, the cerebellum. Now, the most important part of the cerebellum is balance. This is frequently asked. And similarly, what is the function of the medulla? The medulla's function are the involuntary, basically, or unconscious acts such as heartbeat, normal breathing. For example, we don't obviously breathe voluntarily, it occurs unconsciously. So all the actions which occur unconsciously, whether it be the beating of the heart or whether it be breathing, these are all unconscious and regulated by the medulla. Now, the function of the hypothalamus I've already discussed above in the process of negative feedback. It basically detects any change in stimulus. So it is like the homeostat of the body. What is homeostat? Homeostat is anything which detects a change in temperature. And finally, the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Now, this is of immense importance, which we already discussed in the chapter of hormones. How many hormones are related from it: the FSH, LSH, all the gonadal hormones. Many hormones are basically released from it. So now we come to the spinal cord. We need to know that the spine, there are two types of nerves: the cranial nerves, which emerge from the brain, and the relate to and which are related to the spinal cord by spinal nerves. Now, within the spinal cord, there are two parts: the white matter and the gray matter. The gray matter is the central part of the spinal cord, and the white matter is the peripheral part of the spinal cord. So the with age, the gray matter basically atrophies and decreases in size. So the gray matter contains all the nerve cells and cell bodies and is primarily responsible for all the actions, while the white matter is only responsible for supplying the sensory information to the brain or carrying nerve impulses on the to the muscles. Now we will be studying the individual components. So what are nerves? We will study that how is the composition of a nerve. Now, a nerve basically transfers large number of messages, and there are three parts of a single nerve: a dendron, which carries the message to the cell body. Cell body is then like the nucleus, and the axon, which carries the message away from the cell body. So this you will study later. For now, we would have to remember that the similarity, the dendron is called the sensory receptor, or the sensory neuron. There is a relay neuron which connects the sensory to the motor neuron, and finally the motor neuron which connects the cell body to the effector neuron. What is the effector neuron? Is the neuron which basically relays the information to the muscle. For example, in this, I will study the spinal cord reflex later. So, for example, in the spinal cord reflex, whenever there's a stimulus that, for example, you touch a hot pan or you touch a burning substance and it touches you, the sensory stimulus immediately goes to the spinal cord, and since it is a reflex action, it directly goes to the motor neuron to withdraw the objects to stop you from burning. Now I will be covering the action of the spinal reflex with you in detail. So this is a reflex action. Now this the action is basically extensively asked in the examination of O-levels. So a reflex action is a coordinated response to a specific stimulus, and in the case of, for example, a person touching an extremely hot object, the spinal reflex is used. Now, why is the in the spinal reflex? You need to know, for example, that whenever, or another example could be that you touch a hot plate from a microwave and suddenly you withdraw your object. You now the response is extremely instantaneous, and it is so quick that it is there that there isn't time that information has to travel all the way to the brain, and then the brain has to convey it to the motor neurons and all of this stuff. So the body basically has like this is like a shortcut. The message instantaneously goes to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord immediately acts on the motor neuron, which is in our finger, to withdraw our finger from the hot object. Otherwise, if the message went all the way to the brain, there would have been significant amount of burn area on our finger. So what happens is that this is basically the figure how of the reflex arc. So you just have to understand the concept. The stimulus, the heat from the object is received by the sensory receptor. The impulse is generated, which travels along the sensory neuron, obviously, and carries the sensory message to the spinal nerve. Now, over here, as I talked to you about that, the gray matter is the region where all the nerve endings are located. So the gray matter, this is the gray matter located centrally, and the white matter located peripherally. Inside the gray matter, the nerve endings release basically chemicals. Now, this is the cell body I talked to you about, just to have you an understanding. This is sensory neuron, the cell body, and the motor neuron. Like your talk. Now, this is you need to know that wherever you see these two arrows in correspondence with each other, this is a synapse. Now, these endings basically release chemicals which diffuse across synapses. Now, synapses are basically gaps. So whenever we release a chemical, the chemical basically travels through those synapse by the process of diffusion. So this is basically for example, the function of different types of hormones. Now, after going through the synapse, it travels through the motor neuron, and you can see, for example, this was the stimulus. So the cell bodies detected the stimulus. It can basically transferred it to the synapse, and the impulse then transferred to from the synapse to the muscle, or which was the effector organ, and the muscle And the effector organ similarly, the effector organ in this case was the biceps muscle, which when contracted obviously flexes and withdraws the finger from the object. And this was the response to lift the hand from the stimulus. So this covers our video in totality of the CNS and all of the teeth and the cavities. And I think it has been quite an extensive video. So we'll just wrap it up for today, and I would love you to see you tomorrow.